Brian Manning. I'm a financial advisor here in Nashville for Pinnacle Financial Partners, and today we're going to do another webinar on the Paycheck Protection Program. Thankfully, I have Lane Rhodes with me, who will be walking us through the application today. Today's focus is going to be all about PPP forgiveness, and specifically, we're going to walk you through the application and all the supporting documents that go along with that. There's been a lot of questions that a lot of our financial advisors have received regarding the application because it's an 11-page document. But Lane and her team have done a fantastic job of working through that to boil it down to the information that you need to be able to complete that efficiently. I guess, first of all, what we'll do is just kind of update you with where things are. It's important for you to know that the House passed a bill last week that could make some significant changes to the entire program. That means what it means for you as a business owner is that you potentially will have the opportunity to extend the period of time that you have to use your funds from 8 weeks currently up to potentially 24 weeks or even the end of the year. The Senate still has to vote on it and it still has to officially become law, but that's what we're working with right now. And so we're going to go through the application as it stands today and all of the laws and the rules as they stand today, but understand that it's very likely that potentially next week or soon thereafter, we could be coming back to you with additional guidance and information as we have it. And again, our goal today is to walk through the application with you and to walk through what we know about PPP forgiveness, but would really encourage you to spend time with your CPA and your attorney to discuss your specific situation, to walk through how all this applies to your business and your employees and the money you receive so that you can obtain maximum forgiveness. And we will open up the Q&A option for this, and we'll try to address some of those questions at the very end. We'll try to group them as general questions to be able to address. Again, it'll be really challenging for us to answer everybody's specific individual question about your business, but as it pertains to several different general areas, we'll try to answer those at the end once Lane has had a chance to walk through the application. So with that, I will introduce my friend Lane. Lane, thanks for taking some time to join us today and walk through the application. Why don't we start with all the legislation that's currently out there and some of the changes that might be coming down the road before we dive into the application itself.
Thanks, Brian. That is a great place to start today. So there are two bills, both in the House, that both have changes that have been proposed, changes for the PPP program and some other changes for the CARE Act. So the first one is the HEROES Act, and that one passed the House back on May 15th. That one actually was wanting to extend the PPP coverage period for borrowers until the end of the calendar year. So that's very interesting. That gives a much longer period. But the HEROES Act has kind of fizzled out. I don't even know if it's going to make it to the Senate. And the next piece of legislation that also passed the House, and that's the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. And that passed on May 28th with 417 votes to 1. And that's the one that would extend the forgiveness period from 8 weeks to the 24 weeks. It reduces the 75% that needs to be used on payroll. It reduces that to 60%. So that would be great to give some flexibility there. It allows payroll tax deferments for PPP recipients, and it would also extend that June 30th safe harbor hiring back deadline. So both of the extending the deadline of June 30th, as well as extending the 8 weeks to 24 weeks, those are pretty big changes. So hopefully that bill will continue to gain momentum and make it over to the Senate floor without too many changes. There are some people that have some opposition and some current concerns with some of those changes. They don't want it to appear that they are incentivizing employers to not hire back, which was the intent of the program, was to hire back employees. So we'll just have to see what happens with those pieces of legislation. There was also a letter to the Treasury that was done by Andy Barr, Representative Andy Barr of Kentucky, and French Hill of Arkansas. They sent a letter to the Treasury and SBA asking for them to streamline this lovely 11-page application that we're about to go through for smaller PPP loans. So what they're proposing is loans that are $350,000 or less, that there be a more streamlined approach for those borrowers, which I think you and I would probably agree with. I mean, I know myself, I did some loans, as small as $15,000 to $20,000 for some people, and it's kind of crazy that they would have to complete a 11-page application for forgiveness if you only borrow $20,000. So hopefully we'll see that gets some traction as well. And so, Brian, you cautioned people on the front end that we are going to go through this application, but we do know there's going to be changes to it. And for those of you that do have a smaller PPP loan size, it might not be advantageous for you to even start filling this out right now, because if they do come up with a more streamlined application for the smaller loan sizes, you may not even have to worry about this large 11-page application. But those are some changes to come. Hopefully we'll hear more in the next few weeks.
Well, that's all helpful information. So let's jump into the application lane and maybe just offer some general guidance about steps that our clients should take as they're starting to put their documents together, because some people who receive funds at the very beginning of the program, they're able to apply for forgiveness now. But I think given what you just offered, it might be really wise for them to hold off just a little bit and see what all the changes, because there's no real hurry. There's not a rush to begin the forgiveness process, right?
Correct. Yes, there's no rush to get this forgiveness process started. However, if you have already exhausted all of your funds on payroll and other expenses, you're more than welcome to start filling out this application if you feel good about that. But we would ask, we partnered with a company here at Pinnacle to help administer this program so we could get it out as quickly as possible to you all. And we plan to use that same platform for the forgiveness applications. And they're still working on their electronic platform that we will more than likely use here at Pinnacle for you guys to actually complete this application. That will help us streamline it, make it a little bit faster for everybody that's involved. So if you could just hold up to wait for that platform to come out, we would appreciate it. But if it's something where you just need to fill it out today and you feel confident and putting together this 11-page application, we're not going to stop you from that. But we would hate for business owners to potentially miss out on any benefits to the program that maybe change as some of this legislation goes down the road with our House and Senate.
So it looks like our first slide here, you just kind of give us some general guidelines for preparation for the application. Anything that you'd like to point out from the bullet points here?
Well, the very first bullet point, I would think I wouldn't necessarily have to mention this one, but as I was reading the application, it is quite a doozy. I had to read it multiple times before I completely understood it, and I'm not sure that I still completely understand it. So I do think that it's important for anybody that's going to be completing this application for them to read it from start to beginning before you even begin to fill it out. And it's similar to how you would approach filling out a tax return. It's got schedules to it. And oftentimes you need to complete those schedules first before you can go back and fill in the final information on the front page. And so that is how this application is organized as well. So there is a worksheet component. You're going to need to complete that worksheet first before you can go back and fill in the first kind of page that's the PPP loan forgiveness calculation form. One of the things that you're going to need too is to have your original PPP application with you, and then all of your documents ready, to help you fill this in. It'd be best for you to get all that documentation in order. So the information you used on the front end when you applied for the loan, and then the information that we're going to need to collect on the back end, you're going to need to fill both of those in to the worksheet. So getting all that information together on the front end is going to be important. And then I wanted to make sure everybody knows that you need to keep these documents for 6 years. So that's the bank side and your side as the borrower filling out the application. Any of your supporting documentation in this application, you need to hold on to all of those documents for 6 years. You may never need them. The government may never ask for them, but the government is asking that you hold on to all of that information for the full 6 years. And where that could be needed is if you ever plan to apply for another federally guaranteed loan again, they may ask for something from this process. And so it may not be something that you're even thinking about today, but you may actually have a need for it down the road. So I would just suggest everybody hold on to it for the 6 years that SBA is requiring in the rule as well.
Well, let's look at the worksheet then. It looks like the first thing that you've got to go over is the Schedule A worksheet to then move to the application. So talk us through some tips and tricks as far as that's concerned, and also maybe a tool that we're going to provide to our clients who receive their loan from us.
Yeah, Brian. So for those of you guys that actually have your PPP loan application in front of you, the Schedule A worksheet is on page 9, and then there's a couple of pages of instructions on how to complete this. And then just so you guys know, if you went through the application process with Pinnacle on the front end and you used our Excel spreadsheet worksheet to come up with your loan amount, we're going to have one on the back end that's going to do the same thing. That's actually going to take this Schedule A worksheet. It's going to take the whole application actually, but it will take the Schedule A worksheet and it'll give you a template that you can fill in using an Excel spreadsheet that we have created here at Pinnacle. Aaron DeMarco and Dana Sanders have put a lot of time into creating this document for our clients, and we're hoping that it'll make this process a little bit easier for you all, because when you pull up this first form that you're going to need to fill out, this is where you're going to need to have your payroll calculations and your full-time head counts, all of that information gathered and put in to the form. So anybody that's been eliminated, or if you cut hours, this is where you're going to be inputting all of that. And as you can tell, this little form here only has about 6 lines for you to fill in. So if you have more than 6 employees, obviously you're going to need a bigger template. So we have a spreadsheet we've put together that will have lots of lines for you to be able to fill in as many employees as you need to. But that's going to be, this portion of the document is going to be the most tedious for you guys as business owners to complete. But it's going to be important that you do fill in this information if you do have employees. Now, for those of you guys that are sole proprietors, this really isn't going to come into play for you. So this Schedule A worksheet is only going to be completed for those that have employees. But we can go over to the next slide because it's going to get into some of the meat of what you need to fill in on this worksheet. So you're going to need to calculate your payroll cost. So we need to kind of go back and see what is covered under payroll cost. And as the program still stands today under the instructions that are part of these applications, this program covers 8 weeks of payroll. 56 days is what they're wanting you to complete in these forms. You can include severance pay if you had to terminate an employee. So if that employee is no longer on your payroll, but you're still paying out severance, that can be included as well. They also gave some clarification around bonus payments. And so reasonable bonus payments can be included in this. Some are calling that more of like a hazard pay or a hazard bonus for coming into work during these unusual times. And so as long as you're staying under that cap of that $15,358 per employee during that 8-week time period, you're more than welcome to pay out a hazard bonus during that time or a commission during that time. You cannot go over that dollar amount, and if it's something that's really way out of line with what you would normally do as a business owner, we would caution against that. We definitely, the SBA put in there that language around reasonable, so make sure it's in line with something that you historically have done or something that you feel is reasonable given the risks that your employees are currently taking. You can include qualified healthcare cost and qualified contributions to the retirement program. The employer portion of the state and local taxes are included, but no other taxes can be included, just the same as when we calculated the loan amount on the front end. Now, the SBA did give some clarification around sole proprietors, general partnerships, and so I thought it was important that we kind of just briefly hit on that. So general partners are going to be capped by their 2019 earnings from self-employment, and then they actually have to reduce them by on their tax return, the Schedule 179 expense deductions. And then any undispersed partnership expenses and depletion of oil and gas properties. That won't apply to too many, but we do have to include that in there. Then you take that and you multiply that times the 0.9235, and that's going to be the maximum amount of forgiveness for general partnerships. And then for sole proprietors, they're going to be going off your 1040 Schedule E, and this is all from their 2019 tax returns. So we do know that the 2019 tax returns have been extended, but if you're applying for forgiveness, you need to make sure you have those tax returns completed, because those are going to be the forms that we're going to need to collect during that process to come up with the exact amounts of forgiveness. So just make sure that you have all of that documentation ready before you come to us for the forgiveness component. Another change to the payroll that I think we've talked about, but this was a nice change given that it is cash-based accounting, but they're making one exception here on the payroll, knowing that most companies have more of an accrual-based process for your payroll. So for clients that use a bi-weekly or a more frequent payroll schedule, you can actually start your PPP, your covered 56-day period, can start on the first day of your payroll. And so that was a nice change that they made. And they're calling this the alternative payroll coverage period. And so you still can only count 56 days of it, but you can start that so you have a clean start, so you're not having to count payroll from a previous period and match it up with the new period. You can start off afresh with payroll during your PPP loan program. And so it also is going to assume that all borrowers pay their employees through the last day of the pay period. So you may have to make some accounting adjustments there as well if you're using that alternative payroll covered period. Now, you can always still use the cash-based period as well if that's what you want to do, but SBA did offer up this alternative payroll coverage period as well. So we can move over to the next slide. All right, so I think we've been getting a lot of questions around the FTE reduction, and one of the things that kind of was a surprise to us when we got this application is SBA is considering a full-time employee as 40 hours. So that's a little different, but what you'll want to do is for that look-back period that you have, you're just going to consider it the same way. So full-time employees are 40 hours on the front end, so it'll be the same way on the back end. So it's not that they're shortchanging you hour-wise with employees, because, you know, if you happen to count 30 plus hours as full-time versus 40, you just need to kind of go back and redo your records to match up with the 40 hours that SBA is using here. The safe harbor qualification here too allows for you guys to hire employees back by June 30th. And so you want to still, that as far as we know right now some of that legislation may change that, but as we're doing the program today, in order to get that to where you wouldn't have any reduction in forgiveness, you need to have hired back by June 30th. And then when looking for the starting point, you're going to be using February 15th of this year to April 26th of this year, or you can use the alternative look back period as well. So there's two different ways that you could look at it. And let's go over to the next slide because it actually has the calculations here. These are the different equations that you would use to calculate the FTE headcounts depending on which one you want to use. So you can use the pay period from February to June of 2019, you can use the one that's the first part of this year, the January to February of this year, or if you have seasonal employees, they gave the seasonal calculation there. But those are the calculations you're going to need to use, and we're going to have all this in our tool as well to help you come up with that average as well. So let's go on to the next slide.
Hey, Lane, changing to your next slide. I've already seen a lot of questions, and I would just let everyone know that we are recording this webinar, and it will be available on our Pinnacle YouTube channel, likely sometime tomorrow. It takes some time to compress the file and edit it and get it together and ready, so it's not immediately available, but it will be available for you as a recording on our YouTube channel, likely by this time tomorrow afternoon.
Great point, Brian. And as we have changes, we'll definitely record a new one to give you guys some updates as this process ever changes. But this is just a little bit more guidance around that full-time employee calculation of them going to 40 hours counting as one FTE. If you have employees that work less than that 40 hours, you're going to take the average and round to the nearest tenth of the average for that period. If you want a simpler calculation, the SBA is also allowing for borrowers to use a simple method where you would just count each employee that's less than 40 hours as 0.5. And so you're going to use the same calculation on the front end with whatever period you pick to use as your look back period as you would on the back end. So I just reiterate that because I know I've had a lot of people reach out that are concerned since they consider 30 hours a full-time employee. It really shouldn't matter when you do the calculations because you're going to apply that same calculation on the front end for your employees that you had employed prior to your 8 weeks, and then you're going to use it during the 8 weeks as well. So let's move on to the next slide. So basically what we just went through is calculating the full-time payroll and then calculating what all goes into payroll cost. And then that's what goes into that Schedule A worksheet. And then once you complete the worksheet, you're going to actually go over and complete the Schedule A. And so the Schedule A is, I'm going to get mine out so I can look through it with you guys. The Schedule A starts on page 6. And so once you get those calculations, this worksheet's going to work through with you guys, inputting all of that information then onto the Schedule A. Hopefully you won't have any reductions, so you'll still get full forgiveness, especially if you didn't cut pay and you were able to hire everybody back by that certain date. Once we have our tool all put together, you'll work directly with your local banker, whoever helps you on the front end with the application. And if you have questions with making sure that you get all of this information in here correctly, we can definitely help with some of that just to make sure that we're all getting the correct information. Because believe me, we know this, when this application came out, when we started looking through it, it's definitely more complex than we had hoped it would be. But at the end of the day, if you use these funds for payroll and you use 75% of it for payroll, we should be able to get it easily into these forms to show that you still get your maximum forgiveness. It's going to take a little bit of work to put it all together, but at the end of the day, if you use 75% of the funds on payroll cost, then we should have everything we need to start filling this information out. If you use a third-party payroll processor, they should also be able to give you this information to help us complete these forms very easily. So let's go back now to that Schedule A form. We're going to input everything into the Schedule A. And then once you're done with the Schedule A, then you can actually move over to the PPP Loan Forgiveness Calculation Form, which is page 3. So it's like going back to the beginning of the application now. And if we can scan over to that next slide that's got the PPP Loan Forgiveness Calculation Form. That form is where you actually start inputting all the business information. And one of the things I told you in the beginning, one of the things you're going to need is your original PPP loan application number. That's one of the first things you have to fill in on the form. And then it also asks for the lender's PPP loan number. You can let the bank fill that out. In most cases, those numbers are going to be the same, but there may be a few that are different for one reason or another. But we've been getting that question a lot as to what is the lender PPP loan number. And it should be the same as your SBA PPP loan number, which would be on the note page of your loan documents. So those original loan documents that you got when we sent them over to you, whether that was through a DocuSign signature or through an email that you got from your banker at Pinnacle, that's where you're going to find that loan number to fill in there. So it's important that we have that information correct, have your loan amount correct, the number of employees at the time of application. This is your opportunity that if you filled something incorrectly in on the front end when you filled out your application, now on the back end you can go in and use the SBA's 40 hours equals 1 employee. You can use that calculation now to go back and correct so that number matches up with now on the back end, so that you're looking at employees the same way versus if you were looking at them as 30 hours counting as 1 full-time employee on the front end. So you can go back and correct that now on this application. The next section,
I guess it's also good to, remind everyone here that here at Pinnacle, it's great to have the paper forms and they can collect this information and they can make sure they've got it all filled out completely. But at Pinnacle, it's actually going to be an online system that they'll be able to then load all that information in online. So while it's certainly helpful to go through and do the paper application, our system will actually be an online application, and that should be ready in a few days, right?
yes, that's what we're hoping. So we're testing it right now, and it'll mirror these forms exactly. So these forms are a great template for the business owners to start using now to kind of start collecting this information on the front end so that they can easily just input it right online through our own Pinnacle template that we'll be sending out. So Brian, I'm sure you're getting this question a lot because I know I am. And what if you got an EIDL loan or an EIDL grant? And so that is mentioned on this page of the application. If you got the EIDL Advance grant, whichever you want to call it, but the EIDL Advance was the grant portion of the economic injury disaster loan. That was anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 that a business owner could have received. You are going to need to put in that information here. So they're going to want to know your EIDL application number and then how much you received just as an advance. So if you do have an EIDL loan, you don't need to worry about putting the loan amount in here. It's only that advance amount that they're wanting. So it should be no more than $10,000 because nobody got more than $10,000 for the advance. And that does come off the forgiveness. So just for example, if you got a $100,000 PPP loan and you got a $10,000 EIDL advance, you're only going to have $90,000 of forgiveness for your PPP loan. So that information does need to go in there. And then you're going to let us know your frequency of payroll and start filling in the rest of your payroll information. And then you have more lines that come from the schedules that we already filled in. And so then this is going to be more information you're going to fill in from the schedules. And then this is the section too, where you're also going to be able to fill in the non-payroll related costs. So your mortgage interest payments, you can fill in those there, and they're just wanting one lump sum here. Now we're still going to need to collect the paperwork to document these. So make sure that if you're paying mortgage interest that you give us the current statement so that we can include that and validate that that was a legitimate expense. Same for the utilities. We need a utility bill. We're probably going to want to get a couple of these because we have to show that you had the utility and you had the rent expense and you had the lease, you had them in place prior to February 15th. So we may ask for a couple of those. So just be prepared for that we may need to get some copies of statements that are not under your covered 56-day period, just to prove that you had that in place as of February 15th. But this is where you're going to input all of that information. You'll be able to submit it to us through email, through this form, this worksheet that we're going to send to you. And then you'll be able to email over all of your loan supporting documents. So the payroll records, same thing like we did on the front end when we collected those payroll records, we're going to need to collect them on the back end. In a lot of cases, we're going to need to get documents that are going to be from your 2019 business tax returns. So you need to go ahead and be getting those prepared if you're going to be asking for forgiveness anytime in the next few weeks prior to that deadline from IRS for those tax returns. So it's definitely a doozy of an application, but we did want to try to keep it as simple as possible for you guys. The last page that I wanted to discuss with everyone, and we can scan over to the next one, is the Loan Forgiveness Certification Form. And this is very similar to the certifications that you signed on the front end when you did your loan application. And I think it's important that you go back and just read these certifications. Now, some of these certifications, more than likely, Brian, they're going to change once we get updates from Congress. But I think it's important that everybody remember what they committed to on the front end. This is just kind of reiterating this on the back end, and then this is what the business owners will sign and send back over to us. And then one of the things to remember is that if you applied for an SBA PPP loan between your business, even coupled with some affiliate businesses that you own, and those loan amounts totaled more than $2 million, your business will be receiving a full audit from the federal government. And so we anticipate getting further guidance from SBA and Treasury on that will let us know what documentation will be needed in addition to this 11-page application that those individuals have to get over to us. So more to come as usual, but I know we have a lot of questions going on out there, Brian. So what can we answer for some people this afternoon?
Yeah, I think you did a great job kind of hitting the highlights. And like we said at the beginning of the program, that, what we're trying to do in this version is give you some information on what we know right now. There's a bill that's hanging out there that will likely, in some form or fashion, get pushed through that will change a lot of this information. But right now, you've got an 8-week period that you've got to use these funds, and it's 75% for payroll and 25% for qualified expenses. And so that's what we're operating with, but it's likely that information will change, and we'll be sure to jump back in. Lane, I think one of the things to hit on based on a lot of the questions that we've had is that really right now, there's not a rush. Even if you received proceeds in the first day or two of the program, there's not a rush to submit your forgiveness application. It's great to go on, and as we've said the whole time, put your documentation together and make sure that you've got the forms necessary. But there's not a rush to get your information to the bank. And that's a little contrary to the way things operated on the front end, where everybody was in a mad rush to get their information in and get their application submitted. But on the backside of forgiveness, it's actually beneficial to wait a little bit on the forgiveness, right?
I think that's definitely good advice. We're hoping that some of the enhancements that will be made through the legislation that's pending will actually be very beneficial to business owners, and it may completely change your strategy as to how you use the rest of your PPP funds. So hopefully you've already used some of them on payroll expenses, but if they open up the door to let you use those funds longer or use more of them on non-payroll related expenses, it really could change your strategy around how you use them. And I think that it is important that business owners be thinking in that mindset of, strategizing of exactly the best way to use these funds and make sure that they're forgiven. And I still do caution people that any use of the funds on an expense that isn't one of the expense that's allowable under the legislation could put your total forgiveness at jeopardy. So you do want to make sure that you're continuing to use the funds on payroll, on mortgage interest expense, on utilities, and on lease payments. Anything else that you would use it for would be an ineligible use of these funds and could put your forgiveness at jeopardy.
Lane, I know one of the continuing conversations I've had through the whole period on that topic is we continue to see the language around mortgage interest, and it talks about real or personal property. So with respect to interest on loans and rents or leases paid, is that pertaining only to real estate, or is that all encompassing of any interest paid on any type of loan or any lease and rent payment on any type of lease or rent item?
Brian, that's a great question. And SBA did give us some clarification here where they expanded that to be mortgage payments on any personal property. So if you have a piece of equipment that you financed, you can pay the interest payments on that. If you have leasehold improvements, say, you renovated a retail space in a shopping center and you have a loan for that, the interest expense on that would be covered. So you can use it to pay stuff other than just real estate. So it is business interest expense. It's got to be a loan that's in the business name, though. So that is, I know a lot of business owners, and I'm guilty, having been a business owner myself. You take out personal debt and you use it in the business. Unfortunately, in this case, you do have to have it under the business name in order for it to qualify.
And that had to be in place as of February 15th of this year, correct?
That is correct.
So interest, rent, lease payments on any item, whether that be real estate or other property that was in place prior to February 15th, can be included in that 25% item.
Yes.
And you made the point earlier in the program, and I know we had some people that jumped on later. I know I've seen a couple of questions talking about what are utilities, and it's actually in the application. So if you'll go through that document, it actually specifically outlines everything that can be included as a utility payment. So just as long as you've got your bill, like Lane referenced earlier, that you can provide when you submit for forgiveness, then that'll be something that can be included in that 25% area.
Definitely. And they did allow for, internet and cell phones, those sorts of things are included as a utility, which was really great to hear that they opened up that box. And they included transportation expenses as well. And so we are we're hoping for a little bit more guidance on exactly what SBA qualifies as a transportation expense. But as of right now, we're assuming that it's any transportation expense that you would count on your tax return as a deduction under that transportation expense line item.
Yeah, and I see Byron has asked a question here about tax treatment. And what I would sort of group that in with several other questions that we have, Byron. We actually did a webinar at the end of the week last week with a CPA, and he spoke to all of the tax provisions in the CARES Act that apply to both individuals and small businesses. And so that should be posted to our YouTube channel soon. Lane and I are not accountants and CPAs, and so we're going to avoid and try to dance slightly around those tax questions. But we did have an accountant join us that was very helpful in walking through some of the provisions related to PPP, but also some of the other provisions in the CARES Act that are super helpful to both small businesses and individuals. So we would encourage you to check that out. Continue to look at it at the YouTube channel for information like that. Let's see here, Lane. What are some other items that people want to know about? Maybe talk for just a minute, because I know one of the questions that I've had, and I know that's popped up here a couple of times, it looks like Christy has a question regarding employees or even owners of the business that earn more than $100,000. Just to clarify, the number you gave earlier was, I think, around $15,300 during the 8-week period. That's the maximum that can be forgiven. It's still acceptable to pay those individuals more than that, but just to understand that's the amount that will qualify for forgiveness, correct?
That is correct, Brian. So it's not to say that, you need to give all of your employees a pay cut that make more than $100,000 a year. You can continue paying them their normal salary. It's just that for forgiveness purposes, like you said, no more than $15,385,000 can be forgiven for those employees. But then we do add the benefits on top of that for the employees. Now, for the owners, if you're K1 or a Schedule C, unfortunately, the SBA is not letting us layer in those extra expenses for you guys. But if you're a W-2 employee working at a company, you can get the maximum forgiveness for that employee for the $15,385, and then you can also pay their health insurance and their retirement benefits on top of that number. But for you sole proprietors, they're actually saying that as a sole proprietor, that stuff is included in your draw that you take. And so the maximum forgiveness you can get on payroll related expenses is going to be $15,385,000. Then you can also include, $15,385. Need to make sure I get that correct. But then you can also include your rent expense and cell phone and those other things to use up that additional 25%.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. I know I saw a question in here. I think it was from Christy, specifically related to insurance. And the insurance that we're speaking to is health insurance, dental insurance. That's the insurance. We're not talking about liability insurance and those types of things, correct?
No liability, no workers' comp. Those are not covered under payroll and under this particular program, unfortunately.
Right. And I do see another question that I know I've had several times. If you add employees, that's certainly not an issue during this period. The real question is maintaining that head count. And I know I did see another question about if someone voluntarily left or if you terminated them with cause, they are eliminated from that calculation, correct?
That is correct. No, Brian, that's a great point to bring up that I don't think we've talked about too much. So you do have to give us documentation as to, why that employee was let go with due cause. But if, you had to fire somebody for a really good reason, that employee does not count against you. Or if an employee just decides, hey, I'm done with this job, I don't want to work during these stressful COVID times, and if they resign voluntarily, you just need to document that in your records, and that head count will not count against you for the forgiveness. Same for if you tried to hire them back and they didn't accept, if you were trying to hire them back prior to June 30th, as long as you can give us documentation that you did try to hire them back. And then one more thing to note here that is going to be important, you do have to let the unemployment office know. That is an important component of this so that you do not have to count them in that head count. So the only way to get that to where it won't count against you is if you have the documentation that you tried to rehire them and they declined, and then that you also notified the unemployment office, but because we can't have that employee double dipping and being able to have a job and still file for unemployment.
Yeah, and it looks like Elizabeth has a question that I think is good to clarify back to the $15,000 maximum during the 8-week period. And that's the cash piece of their compensation. So we just talked to the insurance aspect of it, and the retirement, that's over and above, but the cash compensation can't be more than the $15,000.
Correct. Yes, that is correct. I keep seeing a lot of questions pop up around the owners, the self-employed, those individuals. So there are a couple of different calculations that are different for general partnerships. And so we'll put these slides out there, like you said, Brian, so they'll be available. But these are also, all of this information is in the instructions too, if you read the application and the interim final ruling on forgiveness that's out there. And we will also have all of this information out there on our PNFP.com/forgiveness website as well. But just to mention it again, so general partners are capped a little differently. They are capped at their 2019 earnings from their self-employment filings. And then you have to multiply that times 0.923 after the deductions. And so they'll go through that calculation in more detail. But it's not just as simple as that 15,300 number for some individuals that are self-employed or partnerships.
I think that's helpful. I know another question, we're up to 95 questions now, so I don't know that we'll be able to cover all of them. But James had a question that I know has seen come up about prepaying some of your non-payroll covered expenses. So if you get to the point where you've used maybe the 75% on payroll and you're trying to utilize the rest and really maximize your funds, Lane, do you have any guidance about prepaying some non-payroll expenses to be able to utilize these funds? Is that something they should maybe consult with their CPA on? What's your guidance for that?
You know, the SBA did allow for the bonuses here, but they didn't really discuss prepaying some of those, you know, maybe insurance expenses or funding an FSA account, something like that, you know, funding it, prepaying more out through the end of the year. And so I would just caution people in potentially, you know, kind of overstepping some of those prepays. They definitely don't allow for you to prepay any mortgages. So you definitely want to be cautious there. So I think the better use of the funds, if you're getting down to where you're trying to use all of it, would be maybe going back and doing a hazard bonus for your employees if it's, you know, within reason, versus trying to prepay some of your business expenses.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So I think as we kind of wrap things up here, a couple of things that I've taken away in summary is while there's several people that are likely to the point where they've run out their 8-week period and they can begin to apply for forgiveness, we would really encourage you to begin the documentation process and go ahead and get your information together, but wait just a little bit on actually applying for forgiveness, because it's very likely that you will have the majority, if not all, of your loan forgiven. There's a better chance of forgiveness, complete forgiveness, if we wait it out just a little bit longer, given some of the potential changes that are coming. And also understand that if you received your loan through Pinnacle, we're going to have an online system that should streamline a lot of this information and help you consolidate some of this paperwork and put it together. And so we wanted to walk through the application with you today because it's very confusing. And there's a lot of jumping back and forth as Lane kind of walked through with us, but at least now you're a little bit familiar with it. You can begin to put some information together to be able to be ready when we've got the online system to walk through. But then also we would encourage you to continue to have conversations with your CPA and your attorney, and even call your financial advisor here at Pinnacle to talk about your specific situation in your specific business and try to get the best guidance you can as we walk through this. So as Lane mentioned, we've got a website, pnfp.com/PPP forgiveness, that we continue to update it. We put a lot of information out there yesterday. And as things continue to change, we'll put better guidance out there. We do have a YouTube channel that this webinar will be on, I'm told, tonight, as well as some other information that will be available on the YouTube channel for webinars. You can go back and look and watch and understand. Lane, is there anything that you would have as we kind of wrap up today?
More information to come. I mean, this program is ever changing, but I do think that the changes that are going to take place now are going to be really beneficial to the business owners. And so I would just caution people to hold on if they still have extra money from their PPP funds, that hopefully some of these changes will allow for them to use those funds either on additional payroll or additional expenses within their business. So hold tight, more changes coming, but hopefully for the better.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Lane, thanks for making time for us today. We're thankful that all of you, there's nearly 1,000 of you that have participated today. Thanks for making time. We hope it's been helpful. Again, if you've got specific questions about your business, we encourage you to reach out to your financial advisor or CPA and have that conversation. And again, as we get more information and more guidance, we'll be back with another webinar to walk through all of that information. So thanks for being with us today, and we hope you have a great afternoon.